Sold my late husband's Rolex to pay for their honeymoon. But the pawn shop owner recognized my name and gave me the whole vault. Along with a list of what they tried to sell, I woke to the low hum of the ceiling fan and the stale hush of dawn filtering through curtains of threadbare linen. The living room felt like a stage set to highlight my invisibility. Yellowed light pooling on once grand furniture, shadows lingering longer than the furniture should have allowed. I had slept on the sofa again, the one in the corner where dust built up like silent witnesses. I was halfway to waking when a voice shattered the quiet. "Yeah? So what if we sold his Rolex, Mom? He was rotting anyway. It was the only thing he left behind. And you? You're just a useless old hag." Her words cut through the air, sharp as broken glass in bone. My daughter's voice, loud, smug, devoid of affection, all in one sentence. She stood across from me, backlit by pale morning light, arms folded with the triumphant air of someone who believed she had just delivered the final verdict. I blinked, startled awake. My heart seized, my throat tightened. I thought I might have hallucinated in my dream state, but no, she was there, wearing that perfect blouse, the one she bought the day she graduated from that fancy college. She had never said a kind word to me since. Then my grandson, half awake, shuffled in next to her and sneered, reckless in the way the young always are when they sense weakness. "Mom sleeps like rotting garbage, Grandma." "Grandma, who even remembers if you are alive?" The laughter bubbled cruel and raw, the bathroom tiles echoing like a grim applause. I sat perfectly still, my spine pressed into the worn cushion. My right hand tightened around the edge of the pillow I had draped over my knees. My breathing slowed so I could feel every insult as it landed, not erased, not ignored, but remembered. They thought I slept. They believed I heard nothing. But I heard everything. I could have answered. I could have raised a tremulous protest, but the winded exhaustion of each passing year had taught me that silence can hold more strength than any defense. So I remained silent, but the blood in my ears turned molten, registering each word as a deliberate strike. He thought I slept, but I was wide awake, every part of me alert as recording tape. Bitter words, sold possessions, cynical heartbreak. They treated grief like currency. That watch was his last echo of love. He who used to tell me that time was only worth measuring when it was shared, especially with those we cherish. I pressed my lips shut. I could feel the old ache in my bones, the one he used to ease when he laid his hand on my shoulder. Not now. They had sold it piece by piece to fund laughter, champagne, honeymoon, selfies. They treated grief like currency, paying for joy with my heartbreak. I stared blankly at the coffee table. The wood grain waited, silent and judgmental. I listened to them move, conversations low and smug, footsteps near, rug shuffled. They moved as if I was not there, like air they could ignore. The moment stretched and then cracked. I looked at my hands, long, pale, and crippled with age, but still alive. Alive enough to breathe in every insult, to gather strength from bitterness, to remember. That was the moment I decided. I would not let this pass. I rose slowly, so slowly that they continued talking over me, ignoring me, until I cleared my throat, just once. All eyes turned. The room shifted. Their words hung unfinished. I inhaled so deeply that the morning light felt like a promise, not shame. And in that moment, the first spark of something else took shape. The knowledge that even when they think we are gone, grandmothers aren't finished until we say so. I used to believe that when you spent your life gathering words, memories, and stories, those things became part of you, woven into your bones like the rings of a tree. But in the eyes of my daughter, they turned a grandmother into a museum piece. Ancient, dusty, and oddly inconvenient. I once taught literature at the university. Modernist poets, women writers, people whose drafts looked raw and whose lives felt rawer. My own book about a pioneer woman's diaries had been cited nearly 60 times when I left the field. I had scholarships for graduate students. I could quote lines of Emily Dickinson without looking. But all of that became invisible when fitting into the polished world of LinkedIn and branding became more important than nuance or memory. Once, at breakfast, I mentioned I had received an email from a student recalling how my poetry workshop helped her write a letter to her estranged mother. My daughter waved her phone and said, "Mom, you think that matters?" I got a connection request from Forbes, not from a memory. Who reads library dust anyway? She pronounced it like a curse. Library dust. She let the words hover, then sank into her phone, scrolling. I stood still, spoon halfway to my mouth. I could taste eggs but not swallow them. Did the work of decades, the lectures, the late nights grading, the student cradled by verse, mean nothing to her? Another time, when her husband died, I buried every expectation of respect, of someone acknowledging my survival, my grief, my presence. I sat by his bedside for days, praying, sitting with his silence, touching his hand. I barely slept. The faint hum of the monitors became familiar, like a lullaby. I told my daughter, softly, I will stay with him until he doesn't need me anymore. She huffed. She leaned back, looked at the window. You're doing this for attention. You're romanticizing death. Let it go. Her words were anesthetic. I held his hand as rigor set in, delayed calling the funeral director for 2 hours longer than I would have, because I wanted to remember the rhythm of his breath when I pressed my cheek to the bed. My daughter probably saw that as dramatic, ghostly, obsessive. Once, while I lit candles beside his photo, she snapped, "You're resurrecting an old corpse. Stop this, Mother." I froze, wax dripping on my fingers. The photo was of him, smiling in a linen shirt. Years before he was sick, before glass tubes tethered him to life, before silence followed his name. I wanted to keep that moment alive. She wanted me to move on, especially if that meant moving out of her online feed. That was the cruelest paradox. For 20 years, I had shaped her world with stories and history. She had published an essay about feminist voices in niche journals that got one frustration reply. Now she rose in the chatter of branding courses. She posted selfies at bookstores and titled them "Smart Girl, Brighter Future," while erasing me from the margins. The internet doesn't see ghosts. It sees campaigns, keyword research, optimization. I thought, so that's what they think I am. Ancient, outdated, something to be cleared out, like a tab on a browser you don't use anymore. But I remembered my students. I remembered letters from people wrung by grief who told me my novels helped them live. I remembered common room laughter about a line of Eliot as we sipped tea. Those belonged to me. And they still mattered. One stormy Sunday, I tried to bring her the new edition of Toni Morrison's essays, worn and annotated from reading with students. I handed it to her, and she said, "Books make my apartment look dated, Mother, like a historian's den. You want me to take them?" I nodded, hands thinning. I said no more. I walked away, leaving her alone with that beautifully quoted cover. Later, I found she had put the book back into the donation bin with a large note taped on. "Please feed them to the fire of progress." When I found it, my heart broke. Not for the loss. There's always things lost. But for how easily they rewrite their love with currency instead of lineage. I asked myself, is my mind so dated, my love so outdated? Or is it that knowledge is only valuable where it feeds platforms, not people? I started noticing how cruelly intellectualism became performative, not knowledge-based, and how I, someone who once held lectures, was now seen as not trending. But knowledge does not disappear. It becomes silent witness. Every day, I kept reading, in the dark, between commercials, of productivity hacks. When she was not watching, when the phone screen didn't glow, I read Dickinson again. I read Fry, Plath. I made notes, I drew lines, I typed out the essays I once assigned. I wasn't rehearsing for a comeback. I was keeping alive what they had casually buried. Little by little, I realized there was a deeper power in being alive despite erasure, more power in someone knowing I was not going anywhere, even when they tried to pretend I didn't exist. That's when I began to write again. Not for publication. For me, it started with lines in a spiral notebook hidden under the mattress. I will not vanish at their convenience. Then pages became letters. Letters became a blog, one I hid behind an innocuous username so she could never search for it without shame. And people wrote back, teachers, poets, widows, daughters of singers I'd never know. They wrote, "Your words saved me. I thought I was losing the past. Now I have something to stand on." That word, saved, made me tremble where she accused me of decaying. Because my mind had not withered, it had rooted. and that rooted wisdom would not be buried. I had learned long ago that true hurt never sleeps. It lingers in the hush, stirring you awake in the dark, speaking in voices you wish you had never heard but cannot forget. That night was one of those nights. I had dozed on my favorite armchair again, the one my husband used to sit beside. The dim moonlight filtered through the old lace curtain, casting delicate shadows over the armrest where his pipe once sat. I felt the cold air of memory nudge me awake, but I thought it was just sleep slipping away. Then I heard it, that voice crushing in its precision, saying what I feared most. She is useless. Our family will thrive once she's asleep forever. The words landed like stones in a silent pool. I held my breath, listening. The echo of that sentiment clung to the shadows. I did not move. I did not cry. I only heard. Because though they thought I was asleep, closing my eyes does not mean I am gone. It just means my form retreats into witness. I sat up. My hands trembled as I reached for the small notebook wedged between the armrest and the cushion. In darkness, I flipped it open. Hands steady enough for ink and memory, but my heart pounding enough to feel the pulse of years in the silence. They were talking behind the drawn curtains. Voices so familiar, so dismissive, they cut deeper than anything physical. I listened to their deliberate assumption that death would be my only replacement, that absence would be preferable. So I wrote, word by word. You said I was useless when all I ever did was give. You think I break so easily, but only silence masks my strength. I paused. The pen hovered above the page. I could feel the seat beneath me hold all of my betrayals, my grief, my love, and my sense of being discarded. The pen offered me reclamation, not of them, but of me. I wrote again. She says I am a weight. She says the house will breathe easier without me. My hand shook, and I paused to breathe. The moonlight warmed my face with a kind of mercy. The house was still, save for the wind brushing through the crack in the window, and the faint creak of floorboards settling. I pressed onward. But I was the heart the house was built around. Every wall, every floorboard knows me. I am home, and I am not going anywhere. The pen came down. I closed my eyes. I did not plan revenge. I only gathered the truth into words where memory and presence met. I rose and walked to the window. The pale curve of the moon looked gentle, as if saying, "You are seen, even when they forget." I thought of him, my husband, of how he held me by the waist when we took long walks, and how we planned gardens built of words and ideas. He had died loving me, believing in what I built, what we built. His faith was not vanity. It was proof that I existed in full. I placed a hand on the window pane, cool and alive, and said softly, "I will not vanish." I returned to the armchair and sat, notebook open on my lap, waiting for what came next, because sleep would come, if it must, but tonight it would not carry me away, because I had drawn my line in ink. I did not cry when I heard footsteps enter later, silent, regretful steps in slippers. When my granddaughter peeked in, she whispered, "Grandma?" I made no reply. That was all I needed to say. The morning light crept into the room hesitantly, as if it feared the ghosts of last night's words might still linger in the dark. I had set the notebook beside me, the ink drying slowly, words like little embers of defiance. I will not vanish at their convenience. I stared at it for a while, tracing the lines with my eyes, feeling strange and new. Clarity. There was a subtle knock at the door. "Come in," I said, voice steady though my heart sparked at the echo. It was Mrs. Hollis, our former town librarian and an old friend of my husband. She stood in the doorway, shawl wrapped around her shoulders, warmth in her eyes. I blinked. She had not been invited. But then again, neither had light or mercy ever expected invitations. "Good morning," she said softly. She held a small envelope in her hand, and something metal glinting like hope. She came in without insistence, closing the door behind her. She looked around the room with gentle disapproval, as if surprised the place still stood. "I was at home when the news segment ran," she began, "about what was said last night." My chest tightened. I remembered the dread that had sunk into my bones. "I knew you were awake," she added, as though stating the obvious truth. She placed a small, unassuming flash drive on the coffee table. It clicked on the wooden surface with purpose. "This," she said, "is everything. I stared at it. You helped him with editing his speech notes back when he planned his retirement talk, she said, her voice drifting as though recalling a time before disappearing. He told me then, if I ever should leave first, will you keep this in case she needs it? The drive glowed with quiet significance. My stomach clenched. She watched me. He knew this. He anticipated it in a way, and he asked me to wait until it mattered. She hesitated, her eyes bright. You, dear, mattered. Inside that envelope were more than recordings. She opened the soft flap and slid onto my lap a small, wrinkled piece of paper. My husband's handwriting, same cursive I used to trace with my finger. It read, if I go first, I want her to have words. I want her to remain strong. Strong. That one word felt like sunlight breaking through brittle winter. I pressed the paper to my cheek. I did not cry. She handed me the flash drive again, and then, as gently as she had arrived, she left. I sank deeper into the cushion, clutching both the drive and the paper. Silence was heavy, but now it was not empty. It was full of everything unsaid and unsilenced. And then, I knew what I would do with it. I would not wield it like a weapon. I would not drench them in guilt or vengeance, but I would turn it into justice, carried softly, like proofs carried through ink. 2 hours later, I sat at the old desk. I plugged in the drive. The screen flickered, the files appeared, audio recordings with my own voice and theirs and that note. I began copying. Every word they said, trash talk, dismissals, cruelty, everything, saved. And next, I contacted my lawyer. I told him what I had. I sent him the note, the recordings, the silent vow. In the afternoon, I issued a brief statement, sent to our local newspaper, the regional affiliate, and the television station. It read simply, I have received proof of spoken erasure. I do not wish to persecute. I only wish for truth. Please verify everything here for public awareness. That note was in there, the quietly prescribed bullet, not to shame, but to testify. Within 24 hours, the story spread, not as scandal, but as a triumph of memory. Elderly wife receives husband's secret recordings, read the header. The tone was solemn, respectful. Conversations changed. Guilt crept into the silence. A respect that once belonged to youth alone had returned to me. I did not receive an apology that day, but neither was I dismissed again. Because power can look like proof, and strength like patience. I sat at my old writing desk that morning, its surface scuffed from decades of pens and paper and pleas for more time, more patience. I was not angry, at least not yet. I was steeled. The spread before me was simple. A small lamp, a laptop humming quietly, and the USB where everything lay, my justification tucked inside. I did not hunch. I rose slowly, straightening my shoulders, remembering how I once held myself when I stood before my student. Then I opened the laptop, breached its screen, and saw 2 files waiting. One was labeled Voices when I was quiet. The other, Final Note. I clicked the first. My daughter's voice drifted through the speakers, crisp and cold. She's useless, she said, casual as stirring sugar. Then the words I had heard in the darkness. We'll breathe easier once she's out of the way. No malice, just dismissal. I heard the second file next. It was my husband, his voice grainy yet warm. I want her to have words if I go first. I want her to be strong. I pressed pause. This moment was mine. I could erase it, say nothing. I could relent for the sake of quiet. But quiet led to erasure, and I had been erased my whole life, by anniversaries silenced, by praise hidden, by published words never mentioned. I opened a new document in my laptop. I typed, I do not wish to press charges. I do not want to devalue forgiveness. I only cannot accept being buried under their silence. I waited, remembering the calmness of his skin when he held my hand, the sincerity of his words years ago. I added, if my life is to be erased for their comfort, I am still alive and unburied. I created a short video. In it I spoke, no tremor in my voice. My daughter once said I was useless and that the house would be better when I was gone. But apparently, someone cared enough to leave me words. I do not wish for revenge. I only wish to remain. I attached the note from my husband as a visual. The camera panned slowly over each handwritten line. No music, no drama, just me, the paper, and a tremble that felt like reclaiming. I uploaded it, unlisted at first, then public. I waited. Tea cooled by my elbow. The house settled. Then the phone buzzed. One message. Respect Grandma. Another. You are fierce. Thousands came. The video reached community groups, literary pages, then national feeds. People began commenting that I embodied dignified resistance, not through fury, but through fidelity to truth. My lawyer called. Mrs. Carter, your video is doing what you hoped, shifting the narrative. Contribute it to the legal record if you wish, but the people have already passed judgment. I said nothing else. That evening, my daughter locked herself in the bedroom, phone clutched tight. I could hear her trembling apology broadcast live on social media. Her face was pale, her voice shakier than a leaf in wind. I'm sorry, Mom, she said. I didn't know, I thought. No one watched through her name. The comment section flooded with support. That word, Mom, it trembled like a heart that had learned to beat again, but only in isolation. Nobody believed her sincerity. Not yet. Still, the shift was irreversible. I sat at the window that night, the moon again offering quiet light, and I realized that true victory is a quiet room full of someone who refuses, disappearing. I'd taken the first step. Morning light filtered through the curtains as I prepared my tea, the steam curling into the quiet. I did not wake with triumph in my heart. Instead, I woke with clarity, the understanding that justice need not come packaged in fury. I had chosen not to pursue lawsuits or indictments. No one needed to go to court. Instead, I had decided to build something life-affirming. That afternoon, I signed the charter document for a new nonprofit, Music for Memories, a fund dedicated to teaching music to seniors and awarding scholarships to children who had lost their parents. The Rolex would become our kickoff symbol, silent, dignified, and carried like remembrance itself. Once the paperwork was complete, we held a small event in the church basement, a modest ribbon-cutting ceremony, my old piano in the corner, and 2 children playing Czerny duets. The local paper covered it with a banner headline I will never forget. Local Grandma turns pain to power, launches music fund in honor of memory. Word spread fast. Within days, regional news outlets picked up the story. The radio station interviewed me. I spoke softly but determinedly about memory, legacy, and how music bridges lives and ages. You turned your sorrow into something beautiful, the interviewer said, voice hushed. I smiled. In the second week, one of my neighbors came by the house, wiping his eyes. You always gave me your best when I needed it as a kid, he said, voice cracking. Now you're giving your gifts to the whole town. I blinked away tears. I'm just doing what he taught me. Why fade away when you can still make someone feel seen? Just after the fund went public, I received word from a lawyer. The will had been updated months before any of this happened to reassign every cent of inheritance to Music for Memories. I had quietly insured in private years ago while he was still alive. But I never announced it, for it matters less who inherits than what is inherited. I stared at the screen. No contact burned in my chest, only peace. She was not punished. She just didn't inherit what was never hers to earn. That evening, the live camera feed from the inaugural lesson session, 20 seniors and 5 children playing together, shifted from private to public. The view, trembling fingers learning scales, faces lighting up in discovery, laughter threading through notes. I watched, resolute. Then came the letters. A woman, a refugee, wrote how her own losses had accompanied her for decades. She said, reading her letter, I thought I would never hear music again. Your gift reminded me how to breathe. A soldier's widow sent me a photo of her son playing clarinet under a tree. His cheeks were red, his eyes shining. This is your legacy, she wrote. My daughter finally posted an apology on social media, short, stuttering. But no one pressed like. The comments were gentle, saying, actions speak louder, and she already spoke with dignity. That weekend, members of the town school board invited me to speak during the local arts board meeting. They proposed a mandate. The school system would offer music lessons to any student who felt forgotten, no fee required, inspired by Music for Memories. I sat before them, quiet. Then I softly said, music taught me how to survive being unseen. I hope it teaches them how to be heard. They applauded. In a final community moment, the corner store owner, whom I once tutored the alphabet during her childhood illness, knocked on my door. He handed me a small handwritten note. "I remember you teaching me letters when I was slow and sick. Now your music teaches us to remember. Thank you." I placed that note beside the Rolex display in my home. I did not seek applause. I do not want a stage. But the world finally saw me. Standing at the recital of the first-year students, 20 seniors and 10 children, I heard the notes drift like breath, weaving lives together. Then I whispered to myself, "Revenge does not have to roar. Sometimes the sweetest justice is learned in song." And outside, the fireflies pulsed, as though answering with light. In that moment, I understood, healing doesn't always ask for applause, it shines quietly. And the music did not stop. I often start my mornings at the little house by the lake before the students arrive. Mornings are my favorite, when the air is soft and the world feels new, even if you've lived in it for decades. I breathe in the green of the water, the song of ducks, and the faint scent of lilies drifting from the garden. Then I open the studio door, where a worn wooden piano waits like an old friend. Today, I have 10 students, 5 seniors, 3 children, and 2 teens. Their ages spread across the spectrum of life, but here they meet on neutral ground. Music. The room hums with anticipation as they take their seats, notebooks set aside, fingers poised over keys. A young boy, maybe 8, his cheeks still shedding baby fat, hesitates before me. "Grandma, why don't you hate them?" he asks, voice honest and heavy. I pause. The piano rests silent beneath the afternoon light. Memories flash. Insults that once shattered nights, hands that never offered comfort in grief. But I do not respond in anger because hate does not compose songs, it only interrupts them. I smile warmly and say, quiet enough that only he can hear, "Hate doesn't fix anything, but music heals." His gaze softens and he leans closer to the keys, his fingers press down. The note rings, shy and clear. Others watch. In that moment, they see what I have seen all along. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is making space for something more creative than pain. My reputation has grown quietly since Music for Memories began. I am no longer just the grandmother next door. I've become something else, a living testament that love is not erased when technology supersedes tradition, and that kindness can win even when silence was expected to swallow you. I glance out the window, seeing the lake warm with afternoon light. My students play a duet, 2 voices, senior and child, winding a melody through time. The room hums with possibility. A local reporter once came to intrigue. She later wrote, "From Rolex sales to legacy tales, the quiet power of an Oregon grandma." I don't read such things for praise, but I keep the clipping tucked into my piano bench. It's a reminder, real strength doesn't shout, it listens. It transforms. After lessons, community members line up to thank me. The former librarian brings cookies. The mayor shakes my hand and says, "You've changed the heart of this town." Not because I demanded change, but because I simply remained. Later, I sit with my notebook under the wisteria by the studio. I write one line. Silence is not the absence of noise. It is the echo of choice. I write another. Music endures where malice decays. I close the notebook and listen to the wind through petals. My life does not end at regrets or the cold words of those who believed I was obsolete. It lives in the notes we exchange across generations, unforced and human. That is victory, not with fire but with tenderness. I rarely pick up my journal these days. It stays open on the side table, pages warming to the sun that pours in after lessons finish. But tonight, I wrote on the last blank page, "Revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it is just dignity lived." In that simple phrase, I captured all I've learned. Power is quiet when earned with compassion, and strength doesn't require spectacle. I held the pen a long moment, then closed the book and set it beside my bed, placing pressure on its cover as though sealing a promise. I didn't fall asleep with triumph. I fell asleep with peace. Later, I woke to a whisper of melody carried from the studio where I teach. A gentle veil of night hushes sounds, but tonight the notes drifted with warmth and life. I rose, slippered feet finding the hallway floor, each creak familiar like the voice of an old friend. By the window I paused, listening to the soft piano lesson continuing beyond the curtains, the students' laughter woven into octaves, the shy hesitations of fingertips finding keys, the certainty that even when shadows gather, music continues. I inhaled. Evening sky blooms over the lake. My breath elongated into hope. I thought of how many phrases I never expected to say in my life, how I believed homes could heal, how melodies could mend, how silence could still be loud. I thought of the countless nights I wondered if I truly existed, until someone heard that I did. I placed a hand against a cool window. Outside, a single lantern flickered in the garden, and a frog sang from the pond's edge. Moments like this remind me, peace doesn't roar, it glitters. I returned to my bed and slipped under the covers. In the quiet, my heart whispered its thanks, to those who listened, to the music that never fades, and most of all, to memory. I will not vanish, I will continue. Fingered chords, ink tracks, quiet footsteps on old floors. The last note of the lesson faded. The candle beside the piano guttered, but the music lived on in the air, and in all of us who carry hope. There, in the hush, I finally slept, and I was not silent. Dawn brushes the lake with soft silver, sunlight waltzing across the water, and I awake not to memory but to presence. In the window's reflection I see the faint curve of my smile, a quiet acknowledgement that after so much darkness, dawn arrives not in noise but in lasting light. I rise from my bed and pad softly to the desk. There my journal lies open, edges curled by years of turning pages. On the last entry I had written, "Revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it is just dignity lived." I run my fingers over the words, feeling them echo in my bones. Those words became more than ink, they became a quiet manifesto. This morning, I don't open the journal. Instead, I head toward the studio by the lake. The grass shimmers under soft fog, and the scent of dew reminds me of first days, first words, first melodies, first endurance. I pass through the old wooden door into the room where lessons wait. Inside, the piano sits in semi-darkness. The air hums with a calm expectancy. Notes from an earlier lesson still linger, bouncing off the walls in echoes, carrying stories of courage invented at last through fingertips. I step up to the instrument, press a chord, and hear it bloom. An admission. I am still here, in every reverberation. A knock comes at the door. Mrs. Alvarez enters, an elderly neighbor who once borrowed our elevator repairman for a housebound piano. She carries 2 cups of tea. "They say your lessons bring memories back," she smiles softly. We stand side by side, the piano's quiet interlude holding us steady. I take a sip. The warmth fills me, not with heat, but with reminder. Almost like yesterday, I offered lessons out of gratitude for his memory, and it had grown into something bigger than loss. As I begin today's lesson, 2 seniors learning a duet, a child practicing simple scales, and a teenager noting rhythm. The room pulses with intergenerational harmony. I watch the seniors share a glance of delight as their music stitches them back into childhood. The child's grin widens with each new note learned. The teen's brow relaxes, proud of new rhythm found. The boy from before, the one who asked why I didn't hate, hesitates at the door. I smile at him, heart full, and say, "Come in, dear." He joins a senior at the keys, and together they find a chord neither expected they could share. I step back and just listen. When the lesson ends, the students file out, muttering, "Thank you, and see you next week." A hush remains in the room, hope made visible in the ledger of learning. Alone now, I walk to the window, where lilies reflect on glass still water, and write a new line in my notebook. Silence is the space where memories become melodies. I close it gently, knowing the music will continue to write its own lines. Later, I join the local newsletter's virtual roundtable. The host introduces our community grandmother, the woman who turned sorrow into songs. I sip tea and blink across screens, seeing friends, neighbors, even former students on the call. No celebration, just connection. A viewer types, "Thank you for giving us back our voices." Another, "You made us remember that kindness can heal deeper than words." I smile again and think, kindness is a pedal pressed, not shouted. Its effect lingers. After the call, I let the screens go dark and sit in stillness. I breathe in deeply, the gentleness of forgiveness filling me. That evening, I lead a small concert in the studio, candlelit, for residents who cannot travel. Elderly couples, widowed neighbors, fragile hearts seeking company. We play memories, lullabies, folk songs, a piece my husband once loved. The notes weave through the room, a canopy of sound stitched by longing and remembrance. The last piece is simple, a melody of thanks. After the final note, silence follows like a benediction. I hold theirs, and they hold mine. No applause necessary. The room understood. A neighbor leans in and whispers, "I never thought a house that felt haunted could feel this alive." I quietly answered, "We only thought it was silent." We were wrong. Returning home, I pause with my journal again. I write, "To those who wondered if I mattered, here are the songs that say I still do. You see, I do not need a legacy carved on tombstones. I need a song that doesn't end." Outside, the wind rises. I open the door and feel it, what I learned decades ago. That presence matters. That even when love is taken for granted, it is never erased if you keep playing. I step into the night. Music hums behind me, carried by moonlit lilies. Time does not hush memory. It echoes it, with resolve. I turn off the light, and in darkness I still listen. The melody doesn't stop. If this story stirred something in your heart, if you've ever been underestimated, ignored, or quietly erased, then you understand what it means to rise without shouting. Here, we honor the women who remember everything and who finally speak, not for revenge, but for truth. Subscribe to Grandma, True Stories, for more real voices, real memories, and the kind of justice that doesn't need noise, just time. Because silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's wisdom sharpening its edge.